All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Chris Ciancimino, and I'm Director of Regional Development for National Review Institute. When the news broke on Monday about a possible leak of the Dobbs decision, the abortion issue stole the headlines and social media was abuzz. When isn't it, though? I hope you caught the coverage on NRO. National Review Institute, under the leadership of Catherine Jean Lopez, has been active in extremely important activity going on in the Supreme Court. And National Review has dedicated an entire issue of the magazine last fall to End Roe. Catherine spoke at the pro-life Dobbs rally in front of the Supreme Court last year, and NRI handed out the End Roe copies of National Review at that rally. We also had hosted our annual lunch at the March for Life and handed out issues of that at the march. Catherine also held 3 virtual events from November to January, detailing some of the issues outlined in that issue. Catherine and our panel today have worked tirelessly to protect life, and I thank them for joining us today. We are joined by today Ryan Anderson, who is president of the Ethics and Public Policy Center and the co-author with Alexandra DeSanctis of Tearing Us Apart, How Abortion Harms Everything and Solves Nothing, out on June 28th. Carrie Severino, who is the president of the Judicial Crisis Network, former clerk to Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, and author of Justice on Trial, The Kavanaugh Confirmation and the Future of the Court. And Kathleen Wilson is the executive director of Mary's Shelter, which provides programs for expectant mothers. Facilitating our conversation today is Catherine Jean Lopez, who is a senior fellow at National Review Institute and an editor at large of National Review. We are going to save some time at the end of today's call for your questions. You can please put those in the chat box, and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as we can. Catherine, I'm going to hand this over to you to begin today's conversation. And thank you again all for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone who's joining us either live or after the fact on YouTube. What a week, what a week. We would be remiss to not have a conversation about what's been going on with the Supreme Court leak and all. I want to, because Carrie, you're the judicial person. Can you just talk a little bit about why this happened, how this happened, what will happen now? You know, this is unprecedented, obviously, the leak of the draft Dobbs decision.
Yeah, so yeah, as everyone knows by now, so Monday night, there was this leak where someone said, hey, we have this copy of the draft opinion from the Dobbs abortion case. And this is something that a lot of people in the legal community just didn't even literally believe initially, because it is so unheard of for something to be leaked from the Supreme Court. We're kind of used to things leaking from the White House or from Congress, but it is really unprecedented, especially to have a full draft opinion leak. And it's I think, on one level, this is sort of rocking, I think, the court from the inside in terms of, can we trust each other, and where did this betrayal of trust come from? But I think it's also a symbol of some of the direction that we've gone in our society in terms of, this used to be something that was unthinkable, partly because anyone who did that would be really ostracized by the legal community as someone who was untrustworthy. And we wouldn't, from both sides of the aisle, everyone would say, no, I don't want to, this person might get disbarred, all sorts of things. Nowadays, you have people on the left that are calling it a heroic act and are saying this is an amazing thing. And really, it's kind of an ends justify the means sort of approach of, hey, if you think this is what's necessary to save Roe, then more power to you, whatever. There's no stone left unturned. And I think it does look sort of like a desperation move. Nobody knows who leaked it yet, but most people are presuming this was probably a liberal clerk to one of the liberal justices who saw the writing on the wall, saw that the decision was going in a direction that they didn't want. And traditionally, you would have those votes kind of locked down by the end of April, which is about, it was right at the beginning of May, and said, this is our only chance. This is the last ditch effort, Hail Mary pass. And, it's sort of a bad analogy in this case, right? Because I think the Hail Mary pass would probably be going the other direction. But anyway, so we have this draft. The draft itself is outstanding. It really goes through very systematically all of the relevant questions. And in many ways, was the analysis that the Planned Parenthood case should have done when it was considering back in 1991 and 92, should we uphold Roe? So it starts with the question you'd think would have been answered by that case, but wasn't, is was Roe even correctly decided in the first place? And that means you have to look at and say, does the Constitution really speak to, is there a right to abortion? And as Justice Alito clearly says, there is not a right to abortion in the Constitution. There is nothing in the text that says you have a right to abortion. No one's ever been able to, have ever even attempted to claim that. They will attempt to claim that various other amendments to the Constitution maybe are alluding to it or can be applied from the rights that they protect. It's the emanations of penumbras type argument. So as you pointed out, Roe doesn't even commit to, or in case you don't even commit to which one of these constellation of amendments it is. So as he said, we will assume, as the court did earlier, that when it said it feels like it's the 14th Amendment, that it's the 14th Amendment. So that's the best you got from the court. And then he went through and said, when the 14th Amendment is passed, there was no right to abortion. That was not implicit in the country at the time. By the 20th century, every state in the union outlawed it until shortly before Roe. And then he went through and said, okay, we've clarified that Roe is just profoundly wrongly decided. Now, what do we do with it? Is this one of those cases that we say, I would have gone a different way, but we're just going to follow it because a lot of water's under the dam or under the bridge? Or are we going to, is this something we really need to revisit? And the court has a set of traditional doctrines they look at to decide, when do we overturn cases that are bad, that are wrongly decided? When do we just leave them in place? One of them is that first key step, which is how wrongly decided was it? And it's just clear, if you look at the words, the Constitution, and look at the history, open and shut case, very wrongly decided. And it addresses an issue of incredible importance because, at least on one side of this opinion, people are acknowledging that there's a human life that is ending as a result of this alleged right. And then he looks at the other factors that traditionally go into stare decisis, including things like, what is the impact on American law? Is this something that fits well with other aspects of law, or is this something that's been hard for courts to apply and has resulted in a lot of inconsistency and circuit splits? And of course, the latter is the case. Is this something where reliance is a real issue, where people have been relying on this decision so that they have had to do a large other regime of laws has been built up? And to some extent that is true, but not in a way that makes it impossible to overturn. I think one comparison we can give is Brown versus Board of Education, which overturned Plessy versus Ferguson, the separate but equal holding in that case. An entire legal regime of Jim Crow laws had been set up in response to that case. And the court said, this is important enough, this is wrong enough that we have to sweep that all away. And then it goes on to conclude that under all these stare decisis principles, it's clear this is the kind of case we just need to overturn and go forward. And it makes it also very clear this doesn't outlaw abortion in the country. This doesn't outlaw abortion anywhere. It really just says this is putting it back to the American people and their representatives. And it also makes very clear, because this is another area of fear mongering that we've said, this is not something that's going to overturn other laws. In point of fact, there aren't really any laws outside of the abortion sphere that were predicated on Roe. And so the fact that Roe is now gone doesn't mean that, as you've been hearing, that somehow now interracial marriage is going to be illegal or LGBT kids have to go to a segregated school. No, that's all, fear mongering and the sky is falling. Let's look at what the decision actually says. And I think a lot of people have been afraid of engaging with the reality of that because it is so well reasoned and it's so clear. So there's my quick summary.
Well, and if one were to actually read the decision, and you can just read the last paragraph and we return the authority to the people and their elected representatives. It's that simple.
Yeah.
I'm going to stay with you for one bit more, Carrie, because there are practical questions that people have about the court. One of them is, so we were expecting this at the end of June. Is this going to come out on Monday? And then the other question that is on a lot of people's minds, and I see it in the chat box, are the justices at personal risk right now? And could that factor into when the decision is released?
Yeah. So the way these decisions normally work is that this case was argued the first week of December. The vote would have been taken that week. And then the assignments would have been made shortly after by the judge who was in the majority of the senior judge in the majority, which in this case would have been Clarence Thomas, clearly assigned it to Justice Alito. And then the drafts are done, right? This draft we know was circulated. It says first draft and it was circulated as of February 10th. We don't actually know if there have been intervening drafts circulated. We don't know if there have been dissents, or as some have suggested, Chief Justice Roberts is writing a concurrence that would be circulated. But the reason we were all expecting this at the end of June is that typically in the most important and hot button cases, that process of going back and forth and editing and writing in the first place and then editing and negotiating over these drafts takes a long time. It's kind of like, you have a term paper that's due in June. You don't normally finish it in March. You normally finish it in June, right? Because it is such a big deal. And the justices, so what will have happened is he circulated in February. The 5 justices who had voted with Alito would have been deciding, do I join this? Do I join it? But I ask him to, can you go deeper into this question? Can you clarify this? Can you take out this part? Can you edit this thing? Some justices, it depends on their style. Some justices get real nitty gritty. Hey, I think there should be an extra comma in this sentence. Some justices just want to make sure that the overall content is there, and then we'll leave the style up to the person. So we don't know what the negotiations that were going on there. Whoever was in the dissent, the senior justice in the dissent would have similarly assigned one of those justices the writing of that opinion. And so there also could be a dissent that's in circulation somewhere. The majority, this draft doesn't respond to a dissent. So we can only assume this is the draft that came out, that, as it said, the first draft, and so the dissent wasn't out yet. There might be edits that Alito would have wanted to make in response to criticisms from the dissent too. So that could be something that, for all we know, there have been more of these things circulated, or at least drafted with this in his chambers. We don't know. So the question is, when could it come out? It could come out at any point when all the justices in the majority agree we're happy with this decision as it stands, and the justices in the dissent would say, okay, we're happy with our dissent as it stands. And then if there's anyone writing a concurrence or other separate writings, like Chief Justice Roberts may have been doing, or like any of the 5 who signed this could have done as well. Sometimes justices will write a thing and saying, hey, I just want to go in a little deeper on the history part of this, or I want to just clarify the part about this doesn't affect other areas of law, or whatever they would like to say separately. So there could be people that are completely in agreement, but also, want to add their own little thing. I would think, and because as this person pointed out, the one of the big things about this leak is not just that, hey, we learned it 2 months earlier than we thought we were going to. We did, instead of end of June, we're hearing at the beginning of May. There's that, but the bigger thing is we've learned about this before it was final. So if, God forbid, something were to happen to one of the justices between now and the time that the decision is issued, this decision would not happen as it's written. This happened in 2016 after some votes had been done, maybe drafts had been made of decisions with Justice Scalia as a participant, and then his vote suddenly wasn't there after he passed away. And so those decisions in some cases had to be dismissed because it ended up with a 4-4 vote. And so you could imagine this creates a horrible incentive. Because, if you're someone who is a crazy person, and we know that there are crazy people out there, unfortunately, on all sides of every issue, that said, hey, this is the one way to stop this. And people on Twitter have actually suggested this, which I think is outrageous. There was even a law professor that said, hey, what would happen if someone happened to assassinate, who will rid me of this meddlesome justice is effectively what he was saying. This is why we're seeing the increased levels of security at the court and the increased levels of security that are being reported at the justices' homes right now. That's why I would advocate for this thing to, you know what? I get that maybe the dissent's not even ready yet. You don't have to, no, there's nothing written in stone saying you have to issue this whole thing together. If the majority's ready and the dissent wants to say more, I would say get this opinion out there just to take off some of the pressure and the threat to the justices that's going on right now, that I think was the absolute intention of the leaker. They are intending to threaten the justices. Maybe they weren't really thinking through this is going to be a physical threat to them, but they wanted them to feel pressure to change their votes. I really think we don't know who it is. I think that's the most likely explanation for what happened. So I would say, Mr. Chief Justice, just release this opinion. There are examples in history where they've released dissents or concurrences months after the fact. They could do that in this case. And I think that would be helpful, because I think it would just be able to make that so you could just say, all right, you know what, guys, you can be angry and you can scream at the sky now, but please don't take any, dangerous measures to say this is our only option. We all know the viciousness of some of the people involved in in the pro-choice movement. And I think I don't want to see any of those people take things in a wrong direction.
And I do want to say, it's a fringe that are doing crazy things in one regard. But I know that crazy people don't represent the average American who considers themselves pro-choice. But this is the public.
And there are crazy people on the pro-life side too. We know that this is just as if someone had published a whole list of like home addresses of abortionists, people would say, that's inherently a little threatening, knowing the history here. The fact that the home addresses of the justices has been published and people have been encouraged to go to their houses for, what is listed on the website as peaceful protest, but that there are crazy people out there who could take that in a different direction.
And very, very angry people, because this issue cuts so deep. Ryan, so what was your reaction to this, and how are you thinking about it?
I mean, so initial reaction Monday night was just shock. Unlike Carrie, I've never clerked on the Supreme Court. I'm not even a lawyer. But I would say for the past decade, each and every term, I've had a decently close friend clerking, and they won't talk to me about anything that takes place at the court. And trust me, I've tried. And like even privately over drink, I mean, they take that confidentiality so seriously that they won't even tell you about, backroom wheeling and dealing or so not only to, leak something about the proceedings, but to actually leak a full 92-page draft opinion. I was like, this has to be is Politico for real. And then, I clicked the link and there's the PDF file. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So, initial reaction was shocked. Second opinion was, this is great. If this opinion becomes the opinion for the court, this is what we've been asking for 49 years, right? I mean, the first step, this isn't the last step. This is the first step, is getting rid of Roe, getting rid of Casey, getting rid of those bad Supreme Court rulings that prevented us from protecting all people from the harms of abortion, right? And abortion obviously kills a baby, but it harms women, it harms family, it harms, more or less everything it touches. Mm-hmm. And this would be the first step in allowing us democratically to pass laws that would protect all people from the harms of abortion. And so, there was the second part reaction was, oh my gosh, this might actually happen, right? Because there's so often, you think about the Peanuts cartoon where, the football is always pulled away. And, that's been conservatives' experience for, a long time on many issues. And so, there's guarded hope, there's guarded, expectation that this will happen. But I think, Carrie's point, her closing point about, it seems that the most likely explanation for why this was leaked was to intimidate the justices, right? And whether that was intimidating the justices through social pressure or intimidating the justices through, physical threats, protesting at their homes. They've also organized a set of protests on Mother's Day at Catholic churches, right? I mean, there's so a variety of forms of social and cultural threats. It seems like that was the motivation here, was to try to get one of the justices off the opinion or one of the justices off the court. So that's why I say guarded hope there. And then I would say third reaction, and then I'll shut up for now, is that it just highlights, I think, the past 4 days of kind of public reaction, how much work, people like the four of us and, so many millions of other people across the country are going to have in front of us, and how much hostility, how much rancor, how much, I think bad faith, a lot of people arguing in bad faith, knowing what they're saying about us isn't true, but saying it anyway because it's effective as political rhetoric. There's going to be so much work to be done. And, I don't think we can allow ourselves to be intimidated. We can't allow ourselves to be silenced. I mean, I think the other side is clearly going to be trying to make life hard for pro-lifers, trying to do the right thing, both in law and in culture. And I just think we have to have resolve that this is a generational battle, and we have to continue doing that generational work.
I've had a number of people say to me that on social media in recent days, they've seen people coming out of the woodwork, friends and family who are normally not very vocal about political issues, who have talked about how terrified they are that supposedly women's rights are going to end in America because of this decision, which of course is so far from the truth. And some of the most ridiculous reactions from some who support abortion talk about this will mean the deaths of women and this is an abomination. We've had an abomination for 49 years. Thank you very much, Speaker Pelosi. And we've used the democratic process to try to educate people and make baby steps in legislation and whatnot. And that's how we do it in America. We don't try to destroy the Supreme Court by leaking a confidential document. Kathleen, thank you for your patience. Kathleen Wilson runs Mary's Shelter in Fredericksburg, Virginia. And could you just talk a little bit? I wanted you to be a part of this conversation because your work on the front lines is so critical. And one of my concerns as we face the expectation of the end of Roe v. Wade in the coming weeks is, there's sort of celebration on pro-life circles, which is gratitude is very appropriate and necessary. But as Ryan alluded to, our work is just beginning. This is what we've been asking for from the court since Roe versus Wade came down, and we've marched on Washington annually. But it's the work that you do, the work that happens on the front lines that I fear Americans don't know about, and even pro-lifers don't necessarily know about. And so unmute yourself, and could you tell us a little bit this story about of Mary's Shelter? Oops, we do have a little mute issue here. Okay.
Am I unmuted? Oh, sorry. Yes. Hi. Thanks for having me here. I'm not in the legal world. I'm not in the political world. I'm in the care world, and we are a home for women who are in a crisis during pregnancy. And I always like to say that because the pregnancy is not necessarily the crisis, and so many people don't understand that. It's everything else going on in their lives. So what we do here is we invest in those women. We give them time to come into our homes. We give 3 years or more to stay with us so that those educational and employment and parenting and housing goals become a reality. So like everybody else the other day, when I woke up and I saw what was going on, I was a little bit overwhelmed at first, thinking, oh my goodness, how are we going to handle this if it becomes a surge of women that will all of a sudden need us? And I had this great peace in realizing that we're just going to do what we've been doing here at Mary's Shelter for the last 15 years, which is grow as the needs are necessary. In fact, before this happened, we just purchased another 8-bedroom house, which will give us a total of 24 bedrooms for families at this point. We are helping ministries all over the country like ourselves open their doors. So there's no concern to me at all that it will be the needs will be met any differently. I think pro-lifers are going to rise to this occasion. Folks that can't obviously run homes like we do are going to donate more. People are going to pray more. And I just feel like it's not something, I have a great peace about what we're going to face and how we're going to be able to handle it and still serve women and see women get out of incredibly horrible situations and make incredible changes in their lives. And we have seen rock stars come out of our homes over these years, and it's just a blessing to be part of their lives.
Kathleen, first of all, I want to say the prayer point is so important. Nobody is powerless in this fight. I'm actually going down near an abortion clinic today after this Zoom with a Dominican priest, and we're going to celebrate Mass for the end of abortion and the protection of the Supreme Court justices. And we should be doing more of the prayer. But you're also, Kathleen, you say not everyone can start a maternity home, which is absolutely true. Everybody has their roles, but you're not like some rich person who runs maternity homes. You never set out to do this. You just saw the need and did it. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So my husband and I, we have a lot of children, and we were blessed to have been sent over to Thailand for 6 years. And while we were there, we did a lot of missionary work. My husband was a federal agent, but we just took on missionary work. Came back to the United States. I was always pro-life, but I didn't, wear it on my sleeve. My mom was, so therefore I was. But, came back with all these kids. We went over to Thailand with 5 kids. We came back with 10. And from some very grave situations. And I became more and more pro-life. Anyway, started going up to a clinic in DC on Saturday mornings and praying there, and didn't feel like I could be a counselor. It just wasn't really my thing. I was a prayer warrior, but I was met with this woman one day, and she kind of fell on her knees and told me, asked me what I could do for her beyond praying. And I really didn't have an answer, but I came back, and a few ladies and I got together, and we just decided, even though we had no qualifications, that we were going to go ahead and think about starting a ministry. That's all we thought. And we went and spoke to a few different agencies and found out immediately that the need was so great, because they started giving out our numbers before we had anything. And it was just a God thing. We answered the call, and we helped the first woman, and it just grew from there. I really didn't have an idea of what I was doing at all. It was all very much a learning process and a heart process.
Thank you for saying that, because everyone at this point in juncture should be thinking, what more can I do? Back to the opinion. Carrie, can you talk about what you were surprised by, if anything? What are some of the highlights? Because a lot of people haven't read the opinion yet. They've just sort of heard about the opinion.
Yeah, and it definitely, it's long. It's not, thankfully, the full 98 pages is not all opinion. The last part is like 30 pages of appendix, just giving a list of all of these historic laws against abortion in the country. I think one of the things that I was pleasantly surprised by was how clear the opinion is. Unfortunately, there's a lot of cases, and Planned Parenthood is one of them, where the court is doing something and maybe doing something big and then trying to pretend like they're not. So in Casey, I think what they're trying to do is pretend like they're just following Roe and going along like they always were. But in the process, they really rewrite the entire basis for the decision. And again, in the name of stare decisis, they rewrote the decision itself. So instead of just applying it, they did a whole new thing. In this case, it's just, they're very clear. They say, okay, well, you know what? As you read it, like this is not good law, and therefore we're overturning it. I mean, it's case closed. It's very simple and straightforward. And, it does get into a lot of the history and stuff. So I'm not going to say it's like, this is not bedtime reading for a 10-year-old, but it's very clear and understandable. And I thought that was something that was just so nice to see from the court, that there's no question out there, particularly because there are a lot of states in which their laws might be affected based on whether Roe is officially overturned or not. So if you had the court pretending like they weren't overturning it, but effectively overturning it, that could cause a problem. And that really goes to one of the things that a lot of people are suggesting this Chief Justice might be doing, which is that it has been reported, and this is kind of what he sounded like in December for the hearings, that he maybe is trying to come up with a way to say, I'm going to uphold the Mississippi law, but I'm somehow not going to overturn Roe. And I think that's unfortunately both legally impossible and also politically and it just strategically very ill-considered. And you can see that just because by the way that the people responded to him at the oral arguments, even the people arguing for upholding Roe did not try to say, oh yeah, you can do that. There's no way that this law is consistent with Roe. He would have to simply do what Planned Parenthood did and come up with yet a third standard and invent a whole new standard for these opinions. So that may be what he's trying to do. I just think that's not going to be possible. And I think the response to this is also showing you why that is strategically a poor idea. And that is everyone's giving him credit for having overturned Roe as well. His name is on that list of these 6 extremists who want to overturn Roe, despite the fact that he, by all accounts, was not the one who signed on to that opinion and plans on writing a different opinion saying he's upholding Roe. So you're going to get no credit for it. You're not going to get credit for being like, oh, this nice middle of the road guy. So why sort of sell your judicial soul? Why try to make up something that's not even there in order to curry favor with people who will never give you credit for that? And I think that's hopefully a lesson that maybe the chief is learning right now. I think it's also, again, we don't know for sure that he's doing it, but the very fact that this opinion was assigned to Justice Alito kind of underscores the likelihood that the chief was probably not in the majority when it was assigned. Because I think a lot of people assume that if the chief justice were in the majority, he would have had the assigning power, because he is, despite the fact that Justice Thomas has been there longer than anyone else, the chief ex officio has the seniority. He would have been able to assign it. The chief is sort of known for assigning himself major opinions. Like if there's a big opinion, he's probably going to assign it to himself. And if there is, particularly if there was an opinion where he's like, hey, let's try to steer this in a different direction, one would imagine he would be writing it and trying to see if he could grab some more people on. That's not what we saw happen. And so I think that he's probably going to end up writing a concurrence of some sort in this case. So I just think that the most impressive thing about this whole case is the fact that it seems like it didn't even happen at all. I think a lot of people were very confident by the fact that we have a majority of the court that has espoused originalism, that has applied it throughout their careers. But we know that while Roe is the question of whether Roe is good law is a very easy question legally, it's a very hard question politically. And we know that there's more pressure that has been brought to bear on these justices in the the political sphere, but also in the spiritual sphere, in every way than we can, any one of us would have experienced on anything. So, the pressure that's been on them to take a shortcut and try to do a Justice Thomas or Chief Justice Roberts like thing, or to say, you know what, maybe I'm willing to apply originalism in every other area, but not this one. And so it's very encouraging to me to know that these are justices who have the courage of their convictions. And it is going to take a lot of courage right now because we know the pressure they're under.
And it really does take the pressure off the court in many ways if they do overrule Roe, because it really is a state issue then. And we're not going to be constantly looking for the court to say something, to weigh in again.
Yeah, that's the irony of it. I mean, especially of something like what we assume the Chief Justice's position would be, because if the chief wrote that type of law, what case is coming before the court next term? Another abortion case. It says, well, not 15 weeks, it's actually gonna be 12 weeks. Or it's actually gonna be a discrimination law about discrimination against children with disabilities or females or based on race. You're not going to get away from deciding abortion cases by coming up with some half measures. The only way to get the court out of this is to actually decide it in a clear, clean-cut constitutional manner. And so while it's going to be a storm and fury in the short term, and we cannot, there's definitely going to be that, right? There's no way to avoid that, really, because I think you're going to have that on either side. If the justices did the wrong thing, there would also be outrage, and it would be a big deal too, right? So you can't avoid this process. But the only way is to kind of walk through it and to just acknowledge what's happening. We're returning this to the states, and then they can focus those efforts and that, the screaming political fighting, and hopefully improve on the dialogue, and let's talk to our friends and neighbors and let's actually have a discussion about what the rest policy is type of dialogue, which we know can't happen while we're lobbying the Supreme Court, but maybe there's a chance of it happening if it's happening at the local level.
I'm noticing in the chat box, a lot of people are asking about where can you find out about places like Mary's Shelter in your own community, and Heartbeat International would be one example. I know Students for Life have a clearinghouse. CareNet is a clearinghouse. There are, Abortion Changes You is a website that has a lot of directories. Those are some great places to start. But I do think at this moment, it's incumbent on everyone who considers themselves pro-life to find out, if you don't already know, what the women's care centers and maternity homes in your community are. And as Kathleen was saying, support them financially, support them with prayer, support them as a volunteer. And if you have some resources, ask some questions, of yourself, of what more that can you do to really help build a culture of life, as John Paul II talked about. And John Paul II's Gospel for Life is worth reading now. I remember when John Paul II died, it was so moving to see, I got press releases from every congressional office, how many evangelicals loved John Paul II because of the Gospel of Life and how he talked about the care work that Kathleen and so many others do. And also talked with great compassion about women who have had abortions. And, one of the things that really concerns me about this crazy reactions to this very simple case in many ways, undoing an error of the past that we've had to live with, is that there are so many women who have had abortions, and the screaming is pouring salt on wounds. And the fact of the matter is that part of the pro-life movement is post-abortion healing ministries. And you can Google online and find post-abortion help, or the Project Rachel, and there are other ministries as well. So that's a really important part of the pro-life story too, because so many women are hurting because of their abortions, which in many cases they felt like they had no other choice. Ryan, can you give us a little preview? I kind of see your book with Alexandra DeSanctis that's coming out at the end of June as a great guide for moving forward at this moment in history. Can you just give us a little preview and how you hope it will be helpful to people?
Sure. We hope it'll be helpful in a variety of ways. Two that I'll mention now. One is that we wanted to kind of catalog, to our minds, 7 or 8 of the biggest ways in which abortion has harmed our society. And so, just chapter by chapter, we look at how abortion harms babies, how it harms women, how it harms people in the periphery of life, so racial minorities, unborn baby girls, babies with disabilities who are at heightened risk for discriminatory abortions, how it's harmed the profession of medicine, how it's harmed the judiciary, how it's harmed our politics, how it's harmed our culture. And then each chapter really just drills down, because if Dobbs is decided the way that we all hope and pray it is decided, that means we now are in the business of persuasion, right? We now need to persuade people. We need to win converts. We need to win public opinion. And that means we need to be able to talk about abortion with people who don't already agree with us, right? It's not just a matter of preaching to the choir. It's a matter of taking people who might have some second thoughts, some doubts, and helping to flesh those doubts out for them and helping them to see that abortion's not the answer. So the subtitle of the book, How Abortion Harms Everything and Solves Nothing, was really meant to, paint that picture. And we go through step by step by step. And so, the first thing we hope is that the book would actually just be a resource for people who are going to be doing that work of persuasion. And then the second thing we do is we hope it's something of a roadmap in terms of what needs to be done. And here we take a both and approach. There are lots of people who try to say it's either this or it's that. And on almost every dichotomy, we think that's a false dichotomy. It's actually both and. So should we be focused on the baby or on the mother? Both, right? Our response needs to be focused at the baby, at the mother, and I think even broader, at the family, at the father, at the extended family, not just the nuclear family, a both and response. Should it be states or the federal government? Both and. We need responses both from the 50 states, but also from the federal government. There's a role for Congress. There's a role for the administrative state, right? So when Carrie's husband was at HHS, there's a lot that can be done if you have the right people at HHS to protect the integrity of medicine, to protect unborn babies, to protect women experiencing difficult pregnancies, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a role for the court moving forward. We can discuss, there were not votes on this current court for the John Finnis, Robbie George theory of unborn personhood. But I do think that when the ratifiers of the 14th Amendment said that no person shall be denied equal protection of the law, they weren't talking Peter Singer style people, right? Higher mental wave people. They meant flesh and blood human beings. And now that we know that life in the womb is a human being, I think it's worth taking another crack at the courts on that argument, right? We haven't litigated that argument yet. So, I think both and, right? So it's going to be states and federal government, legislative branch, executive branch, judicial branch. I think we need to look at both public policy and law and civil society and culture, right? That's why I love that we have both Carrie And we have Kathleen, right? I mean, so like Mary's Shelter is going to have an important role to play here. Capitol Hill Pregnancy Center, Northwest Center, Birthright Loudoun County, Sisters of Life, right? All those groups on the cultural side. So too law and public policy prohibiting lethal violence in the womb, but then also empowering women to choose life, families formation. So a lot of the work that my colleagues at EPPC, Erica Bakayaki, Patrick Brown, are really thinking through, right, what sort of public policies can help more women carry their babies to term. Look at what Ron DeSantis recently signed into law in Florida with the Fatherhood Initiative, promoting fatherhood bill. Look at what Texas did. Texas, all of the media attention was on the heartbeat bill, but simultaneously they allocated $100 million additional dollars to the Texas Alternatives to Abortion program. Right. And I think this shows that pro-lifers already are thinking in a both and framework. We're being holistic. We're looking at law and culture, economic concerns and legal concerns, the mother and the baby, et cetera, et cetera. And so anyways, that's what we hope the book accomplishes, just like presenting the best argument, we could assemble about why abortion is not a solution. And then, sketching a roadmap forward on what do we need to do in a post-Roe, post-Casey United States.
In terms of alternatives, I mean, as you mentioned, there's so many ministries, so many groups, so many nonprofits that help in other levels of this issue. Witness to Love is a group I'm on the board of. They do marriage mentoring. If we have strong marriages, a culture that supports marriage, well, that's going to help the abortion situation, right? You're not going to have as many scared single women and girls. There's so many different groups. Also, adoption, right? The pro-life movement needs to seriously communicate about adoption more. One of my favorite groups is called Brave Love, which celebrates birth mothers, right? It's courageous to acknowledge that you're not up to it, but yet have the baby and let someone love this baby. And there's so many couples who have infertility problems who would love to raise a baby. And so to communicate better on that, about how to do it, but also that there's not shame in it. Abortion is not a solution. Adoption is a solution that keeps the child alive, not dead. Kathleen, you mentioned how you have rock stars that you've worked with. Abortion says that women can't do the amazing things that mothers do. And can you talk about, I know there's a recent story about a mother who I think is going to nursing school or just graduated from nursing school. Can you tell that story?
Sure, I'd be happy. Her name is Rachel. She speaks at our events, and so she's very happy to share her story. She came to us when she was pregnant with her second pregnancy. She had a 3-month-old at the time, so they were very close together in an incredibly abusive relationship. Terribly abusive. She came to Mary's Shelter to get out of that relationship finally when the second pregnancy happened, because she wanted to protect both the baby she now had and the baby in the womb. And she came to us, and she was such a beautiful woman, but she was filled with anxiety. She really needed a little bit of time and care and love and a little bit of mental health. And she pulled herself together. She got the resources through our ministry. She pulled herself together, and she went back and got her GED. And then she got her CNA. She became a phlebotomist. She went on, continued her education. After she was with us for a few years, she moved into her own apartment with her 2 children. And just this past year, she became a registered nurse at our local hospital here in Fredericksburg. So she's a rock star. We have lots of stories like that. We have incredible stories like that of families reconciling, of people getting the mental health they need, of women getting out of abusive relationships, mental health needs being met, drug assistance being met. You know, we are not just saving the baby here. We are saving the women. We are watching families transform. And it's so much more than that big lie out there that we only care about that baby in the womb. We love these women. In fact, many of the women who've left our homes 6-7 years ago are still in our lives. We see them all the time. They come back for Christmas. They come back for Easter when they need help with a car payment, or they're finding themselves in a hard place. Or one of our moms who has 5 little girls who moved into her own apartment and we sent her 5 beds and 5 mattresses. You know, they're very much in our life. We don't turn our back on them ever. So, yeah.
That is, again, one of the stories of the pro-life movement that I don't think people know. I hang out a lot around the Sisters of Life, who Ryan mentioned, and there are constantly women who, as you said of Mary's shelter story, who had babies years and years and years ago, and the sisters are part of their lives. Maybe a particular sister is like an aunt to one of these children because the sister was there at the critical moment, right? And your work too, this is true of the sisters, it's true of your work, Kathleen. It's not, they don't come to you and you don't say, okay, become Christian and have the baby. You love them back into life in so many ways. You know, your first comment isn't don't have an abortion. It's like, sit down, relax, you know, be at peace and going from there. It's and you have many wild success stories, you know, but you also have women who, you know, life is difficult, who are broken, and they'll come back, you know, having fallen maybe back into a drug habit, and you help them again, you know, in their next pregnancy. And so you're loving these women, and it's really a beautiful story, what you do at Mary's Shelter and what thousands of ministries across the country do, and are often caricatured, unfortunately, when they actually make it into the media. So thank you for being part of this conversation to talk about the work that you actually do. This is coming up a little bit in the chat box too. So maybe one of you would want to comment on this. We are hearing that like women are going to die if Roe versus Wade is overturned, and we hear some extraordinarily rare cases that become kind of the norm. You know, if Roe is overturned, women in difficult medical situations are still going to get medical care, right, Ryan?
Yes, I mean, so from both a moral and a legal perspective, you know, medical care that is necessary for the physical health of the mother, even if the child is foreseen, but it's not intended that the child will die. This is the, you know, kind of principle of double effect coming out of natural law and, you know, in particular Catholic moral analysis. That is appropriate care. And so, you know, 2 of the most common examples would be things like ectopic pregnancy or uterine cancer, even during pregnancy. It's entirely appropriate to treat the ectopic pregnancy, to treat the uterine cancer, even knowing that that means unintendedly the child will pass away, right? It's not the intention, it's not the goal, it's not kind of intentional killing, it's foreseen but unintended as a result of a true medical treatment, right? Healing the uterine cancer, removing a human being from growing where it's not supposed to, right? Babies can't grow in fallopian tubes. If they continue growing in that location, it will kill both the mother and the baby, right? And so neither of those cases would any pro-lifer who knows anything about anything say that medical treatment's inappropriate. 2 other things to add. The statistics that you always hear that, you know, prior to Roe v. Wade, there were 5,000 to 10,000 women who died in back alley abortions, entirely fabricated, right? And so, you know, Zan and I, you know, we document this. Bernard Nathanson admitted later in life that back when he was head of NARAL pro-choice, he just made up the statistic because he thought it was necessary. The ends justify the means, and he was part of a righteous cause. And then something else that Zan and I cite in the book is that the global experience today is that some of the countries that have the most pro-life laws also have the best maternal health indicators, that we need not pit women's health and the lives of unborn babies. And the global experience has been that the countries that do the best on the one also do the best on the other. And so there's no reason to think that in the United States that if we prohibit abortion, if we protect unborn human lives, that's going to come at the cost of women's lives. We can love them both. We can protect them both. And we have to. I mean, I think that the bottom line for pro-lifers is we have to do both.
Well, and it focuses the mind. We had an article in our End Row issue that pointed out that America currently is in league with North Korea and China when it comes to our abortion laws. And I'm pretty sure none of us want to be in that company.
No. And the other thing to add there, I know we're almost out of time, but I mean, the Mississippi law is a 15-week bill. 47 out of the 50 European countries have laws that are at least 15 weeks. Some are earlier, right? And this is coming from the Charlotte Lozier Institute, Chuck Donovan's group. So you know the research is solid. Do any of us think that 47 of the 50 European countries are these terrible backwater places that are inhospitable to women? The answer is no, right? And so that's what's at stake in the Mississippi law. I would just add one last thing to that. Unfortunately, 92% of abortions in the United States take place before 15 weeks. So, you know, we're not, if we only ended up at 15 weeks, that's not good enough.
Right.
Too many babies will still be slaughtered. And so, you know, that's a starting point. It's not the finishing line. It's not the finish line. And so we have to keep making incremental progress towards the ultimate goal of every life protected in law all across the United States. That's the prize, and eyes on the prize.
And we could do a whole nother webinar about abortion pills and how that is changing the culture of abortion as well. We're not going to do that right now. That'll be a future conversation. But the
majority of abortions right now are that way. I mean, just for our viewers, the one soundbite on that, the majority of abortions now take place through chemical abortions, frequently through the mail.
So women and girls are not seeing anybody, and they're aborting their child in their apartment. It's really abhorrent and hidden, and so that's going to be one of the next steps of this civil rights struggle, really. Carrie, can I give you a last word, and then Kathleen, and then Ryan?
Yeah. So if this case comes down the way that we envision, this is going to be an incredible victory at the federal level, showing the importance of focusing on judges who have a sound view of the Constitution. Not because that's necessarily going to lead to pro-life results every time. You know, it means that if they were interpreting a law that is a very pro-abortion law, they would have to follow law, but it means that the American people have a voice. Even if Roe is overturned, we have to make sure that we recognize the next step, even legally also, is not over in the state courts. We're already seeing moves for kind of mini Roes, like Kansas, their Supreme Court saying, hey, actually, turns out our Constitution says this too. State constitutions can address this issue. And I think that's one of the, there's so many areas that they're going to be forefront legally on this. But just from my perspective, as someone who looks at the judicial side of things, this is going to move that issue from the federal courts to the state courts. And unfortunately, while the federal court now does have a majority of originalists, a lot of state courts are in a different position right now. So, for everyone who has been, marching on Washington and praying for the court and working toward getting solid justices at the U.S. Supreme Court, we can also now focus our efforts on making sure your state court is one that's going to be faithful to the laws that you pass. So it's passing laws that are going to be protective of life, but also then making sure you don't have judges that are going to misinterpret those laws or read fake rights into your state constitutions as well. But it's nonetheless a huge day for celebration, because that also shows that if it's possible at the federal level, this is possible throughout our system to have judges that are actually bound by the rule of law.
Kathleen, closing words?
Well, first, I just want to thank you for having me today. It was an honor to be with these amazing pro-life friends today. Just if you are in a community where you are looking to possibly open a home and you're feeling nervous about it or feeling like you're not qualified, please reach out to us. We will help you. We help open homes like ours all over. We will share everything with you that we have and stay with you for years, just like we do with the women that we serve. And we are very, very blessed to be doing what we're doing. It's a gift from God that we have so many people that support us and support the women who made that choice to have their baby. So thank you for helping us spread the word.
And Ryan.
Let me echo something you said earlier to people who are watching. if you can, make a donation to Mary's Shelter, make a donation to Capitol Hill Pregnancy Center, Birthright, Loudoun, whatever your local pregnancy resource center is. Second, pray, especially this weekend, given some of the protests that are already, being planned and announced at the justices' homes, at houses of worship this weekend. Pray for peace. Pray that between now and whenever the decision is decided, nothing changes. I think we all want to see something that resembles the leaked draft become the majority opinion. And then lastly, I'll say, look, this Sunday is Mother's Day. Celebrate the mothers in your life, the birth mothers, the foster mothers, the adoptive mothers. Next month, celebrate Father's Day. I spent a large part of my professional life insisting that mothers and fathers both matter and they're not interchangeable. And that's still true. And I think marriage really is going to be the long-term best protector of life. And I noticed David Upham in the comments mentioning that as we were doing this. And I really think that, we need to be doing both, promoting marriage, promoting family, defending life, celebrating mothers, celebrating fathers. And, the timing of this is providential, that Sunday is Mother's Day. So, enjoy the weekend. That's true.
And life isn't perfect. And there are situations where there are courageous single moms raising children. Be a support, be a friend, be a mentor to the children. There are, I'm thinking of a family right now where the husband dies or the wife dies, and we need to support these families, not just the week that the spouse dies. And if very, very often we don't even know the adopted families or foster families in our own churches. And so make it a point to find out who they are and have a dinner chain and let there be date nights. And we have to think about all these things more now that we're at this milestone moment. And so I just want to thank you, Kathleen Wilson from Mary's Shelter in Fredericksburg, Virginia, Carrie Severino from the Judicial Crisis Network, and Ryan Anderson from the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and you're co-author of the upcoming book, Tearing Us Apart. Thank you, everyone who spent time listening to this. And could I please implore you to share the link of this conversation with friends on Facebook? I think it will help people understand better what is actually going on. And I thank you all for your support of the National Review Institute. Bye-bye.